So in the video game collecting community, especially in the retro game collecting community, we like to act like the prices of video games don't matter, because if you're a gamer, you should just be worrying about, the gameplay, playing the game, beating the game, and anything financially associated with the video game should just be ignored. But that is a very wrong way to approach video games, especially used video games. And by the end of this video, hopefully you'll understand why I feel that way. But let's take a step back about 5 years ago, when we were all locked down, we were all inside our homes, and we were all looking for just a way to take our minds off of everything that was happening in the world. And for many of us, we turned to video games. We turned to not just modern games. I think around that time was when the PlayStation 5 released, if I'm not mistaken. So we were playing Switch, we were playing PlayStation 5, but many of us were also looking at retro video games. And the demand for these items became very, very high, probably the highest we'd seen in quite some time. And so the prices reflected that, right? Prices started to reflect the demand that we were seeing for retro video games. And it wasn't just like hype, it wasn't just something that was happening online. This level of interest was happening at a very granular level. I remember walking into video game stores, local mom and pop shops near me, and seeing people who walk into the stores. I remember one specific instance. I was in a mom and pop shop, and three businessmen, like three dudes who looked like they were on their lunch break. They walked in with their company ID cards either around their neck or hanging from their waist. They were in business casual. I think a couple of them were, dressed fully suited up, but their ties were loosened, and you can tell that, either they were on a lunch break or their workday was winding down. And they walked into this retro game store, and they were just like in awe. They were like, dude, I haven't seen this, in 15 years. Oh man, do you remember this? Do you remember this Super Nintendo? Do you remember the Sega Genesis? Wow, I haven't seen this game. And they were literally marveling at a lot of the retro games that were there. And by the end of their visit, they had walked out with about 3 consoles, about 15 games, and they were pretty much on their way to go and relive their childhood. And this wasn't just something that was happening in that instance. There were many people, even friends and people that I knew who I had never heard talk about video games. Even they were getting into video games. And so it went from being kind of like this niche hobby to almost like this commercial, casual type of hobby that just casual folks who weren't really diehard gamers were getting into. And we saw this have a tremendous impact on price 5 years ago. And those ripple effects are still being felt today, 6 years later. We're still seeing and feeling the ripple effects of how that financially impacted the retro video game market. And obviously, whenever there's a demand for anything, you have people who try to capitalize, because we are in a capitalistic society. We are in a society that rewards people who find ways of maximizing the dollar. Whether it's through exploitation, whether it's through just being at the right place at the right time. We're in a capitalistic society. And, just like how we see people just going crazy over Pokemon cards, and we see all the mass hysteria and just all the talk and all of the energy and attention surrounding Pokemon cards because of value and how much values are rising and people fighting in Walmarts, we kind of saw, a portion of that same level of hysteria around retro video games. And so what happened was a little bit different though. See, when it comes to Pokemon cards, a lot of people don't like resellers because they feel like resellers and a lot of the adults who view Pokemon cards as an investment, for a lot of people, they feel like it's taking away the experience from kids who actually just want to, play Pokemon cards. Now, I'll be honest with you. I don't know how many kids desire to meet up and like actually physically play the Pokemon game with one another. I don't know. You guys can let me know down in the comments, but I would venture to say that there's probably more people actually playing video games on a daily basis than there are people meeting up to like play like with physical Pokemon cards on a daily basis. I'm just gonna take a shot in the dark. If I'm wrong, you guys can let me know in the comments, but I'm almost positive there are more people actually playing video games. And because of the utility and the use and how much people actually played video games, the mass hysteria around video games, whether they be modern games or retro games, as long as they were used physical games, the hysteria around this, I think, hit the community a little bit differently because people weren't just buying these games to have them and stack them on a shelf. A lot of people were playing these video games. They wanted to play these games. They wanted to relive these experiences. They wanted to have them and use them. And so I think the level of use and the level of utility and the amount of actual game playing that goes on in the hobby of video games versus Pokemon caused a different type of reaction within the community when it comes to how people viewed those who viewed video games as a financial asset or some types of means to build wealth or, make money. And so from that stemmed this genre, almost this subculture of gamers who despise primarily resellers, right? Anyone who buys video games to resell them, anyone who buys a video game and talks about how much a game is worth, anyone who, looks at the value of video games, even if that person is going to go and play that game, it's almost like if you talk about the value of a game, you're almost chastised within the video game community, especially within the retro gaming community, because of the impact of 2020 and how prices have had rose, and then the people that became famous from capitalizing on that moment in time. And we could go down the list, right? Probably some of the biggest names that that receive the most hate for this is enemy number one is Phoenix Resale. I'm not an enemy of Phoenix Resale, but in the eyes of a lot of people who have this problem with people who view video games as a business or as inventory or as something to make money, Phoenix Resale is probably like the poster child for someone who kind of found a way to monetize the hype and hysteria and build an actual business. And he went from being a small time reseller to being a big time reseller to being a national reseller, flipping all that all the way into actually owning a video game store. And now he has a business. He has Amazon distribution, he has a physical brick and mortar store, and he legitimately sells video games. He has a video game store. Obviously, you could look at some of the other people who have done this, maybe Chase After the Right Price. I don't think they have a video game store, but I'm sure they have some type of distribution. And there are other people who have done this, right? And because of their following, right? They have their own following. At one point, I think Phoenix Resale on his personal channel, I think he approached something close to maybe 500,000 subscribers. I don't know if he ever got to 500,000, but he had a large following. And the same thing goes for, the Chase Group and, just a lot of these guys who who built their brand off of reselling video games and using and looking at video games as a financial tool to build wealth and build businesses. And it created this chasm, it created this divide within the video game community. Again, especially the retro game community, where if you even mention the value of a game, it's like, oh, you're not a real gamer, and oh man, you're just like Phoenix Resale, and oh man, you're horrible, and you just become this horrible person if you consider how much a game is actually worth, or if you consider how much you can get for a game, especially if you find the game at a really decent price. And it even got to the point where if people who made video game hunting videos, if they found a game that was worth $600 but only paid the person $5 for it, then that person got chastised, right? It was like, how dare you only pay $5 for a $600 game? You should be paying that person at least $300, right? And so all of this kind of like weird moral soapbox type rhetoric started to formulate around retro game prices and how people should view it and all this type of stuff. And it became one of two camps. Either you fell into one of two camps. And I've always been the type of person on this channel where I believe you can do both. I believe that you can have a genuine passion for video games, especially retro video games. I believe you can really like to play video games and enjoy playing them and learning about them and learning the stories and getting deep into the weeds of video games. But I also think that you can factor in the value of a video game. And I think you can also appreciate the worth of a game, especially if you find that game at a considerably cheaper price. I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at your collection and attaching a value to it and saying, man, you know what, if I were to sell my collection would be worth X amount of dollars or this amount of dollars. I don't see anything wrong with that. I think you can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I don't see a problem with it. But today, in today's time, I feel like there's a big faction of the gaming community that does not like to regard, physical games, values, and things like that. And that in my opinion, that is a mistake. And I'm going to tell you why. We've learned that physical is already limited to a degree. But what we're learning and the conclusion that we're coming to in real time is that the tap is about to be cut off for physical video games. It's going to be cut off. Sony already announced it. I'm sure other game companies are going to follow soon. Xbox just laid off like 4,400 employees. A lot of these gaming companies are going to be laying people off. They're going to find cheaper, more efficient ways of doing business. They're going to continue to find ways to cut costs. And a big part of cutting those costs is eliminating the manufacturing of physical video games, because from a business standpoint, it is very costly to manufacture these things. And there is a small number of the gaming community that's still out there, that would be willing to pay increased prices for physical video games. We're small. I know we're loud on the internet, but we're actually a small portion of the customer base. And so because of this, the tap on physical is going to be shut off pretty soon. And this is going to have a massive ripple effect on all of the remaining physical games that are left, because what we know is that no more of these games are going to be made. Now, will there be custom companies that make, reproductions of these games? Are there going to be like homebrew companies and companies like Limited Run and Strictly Limited that are still going to come out with physical items? Yes, but those will always be third-party companies. We're going to see the end of first-party games, first-party delivery, of these games, and I think it's going to have a financial impact, and that impact, maybe we won't feel it tomorrow, maybe we won't feel it 3 years from now, 5 years from now, but I think in my lifetime, I will be able to look back on this video and say, wow, in 2026, I knew that it was going to have an impact, but I didn't know that it was going to turn into this in 2045. And no one knows what that future is going to look like. But what I do know is that one thing about our society, and I'm going to go back to it, capitalistic society, one of the things that I know about our society is that it centers around supply and demand. It centers around supply and demand. And when the supply of something is cut off, shut off, that just makes all of the remaining supply that much more valuable. And so whether you're a person who doesn't have a collection of video games, and there's physical video games that you think you might want to have in the future, or whether you're someone who has a huge library of video games, and you've got thousands of games and you're not sure how much longer you want to dedicate an entire quarter of your house to video games, or your whole house in some cases, how you navigate the future of whether you decide to sell your collection or build a collection is really going to hinge on the financial impact of physical video games no longer being produced. And in my opinion, to efficiently gauge how you're going to navigate the future of collecting physical video games, buying games, selling games, you have to acknowledge the financial aspect of it. You have to acknowledge the value of games. Otherwise, you'll be going out there and you might be overpaying for certain games. If you have these games and you're thinking about selling, you might be drastically selling these games at far lower of a price than you should be getting for those games. And yeah, of course, there's always going to be those people who say, well, when the game first came out, it was only $40, so you shouldn't be charging anyone more than $30 for it. I think that stuff is stupid. I think Telling someone how much they should sell something for is stupid, in my opinion. The market dictates the price, period. That's it. That's it. There's no moral soapbox to stand on here. The market determines the price. Do you think that a guy who bought his house in 1963 and only paid $45,000 for it should now sell it in 2026 for 75,000 when he could get 1.5 million? Like, does that make sense? Would you do that? No. Like, you wouldn't do that. So to have this idea that, to put some type of morality clause, to me makes zero sense. Now, please bear in mind, and I'm gonna say this for the kids in the back. This does not mean that you go and do shady things. This doesn't mean that you do bad business. It doesn't mean that you lie to people. It doesn't mean that you sell fake games. It doesn't mean that you inflate prices. It doesn't mean that you try to gouge people. No, what I'm talking about is fair market value, right? If the price of a copy of Pokemon Soul Silver is $400 and someone is charging you $400 for the game, you can't turn around and get mad at them that you're asking market price. You know what I mean? You can't get mad at that person because they won't sell it to you for 100. That's just dumb. You can turn around and walk away and say you're not going to buy it, but getting mad at people for charging fair market price for certain items just doesn't make sense. And if we're operating under the basis of fair market price, we are going to see the fair market price for a lot of these games change. And they're going to change over time. I'm not saying they're going to change tomorrow, but I think it's important, even today, still, to know where you stand and know where games stand in terms of their value, what they're selling for, so that you can make an informed financial decision about what you're buying and what you're putting into your collection, or how much you could get for a game that you have in your collection. Because who knows, maybe you could get more for it so you can trade and get a different game that you want that might be just as expensive. But to sit back and ignore video games and just say, oh, all I care about is the gameplay, or I don't care about how much they're worth, I just care about how much fun I have, to me, that would just be, it's just not a wise move, especially if you plan on staying engaged in the hobby of collecting video games and buying video games and selling video games, ignoring the value, ignoring the price, ignoring what games are going for to maintain some level, some, self, image of, I don't know, morality. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it's about, because I don't view it that way, but I just think that would be a very foolish move to make. So again, I think this is why I think, paying attention to used video game prices, this is why I think paying attention to retro game prices is very important. And it's not going to get less important as time goes on. It's going to get more important, because these are, in a lot of cases, collector's items. These are pieces that people are going to want to have. Some of these games are going to get more and more rare as time goes on. There's going to be fewer and fewer copies out there, and the demand is going to determine how much someone is willing to pay for the item. And how much someone is willing to pay for the item is what sets the market rate or the market price for the item. And so these are just my thoughts. I thought about making this a really deep video and adding a bunch of visuals and cutscenes and stuff in here, but I thought that this was just a very simple conversation that we might want to have here in the retro gaming community. If you disagree with me, let me know your comments down below. I'd be interested to know your thoughts, and I'll catch you in the next one. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.